Welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham right here on TalkTV. It's 20 past 11. It's a bit murky out there. It was raining this morning, although I have to say I was quite pleased. No doubt there will still be a hosepipe ban into Kent and Sussex, though. So stand by your beds and don't have any showers and don't water anything, for heaven's sake. Laura Dodsworth is here. Very warm welcome to you. Nice to see you.
Good
we
morning.
missed you last week. I'm sorry about that. But there were events that overtook matters, and so we couldn't see you. But
I don't like the way news gets in the way of a half hour. I know it's a news show, Mike.
yes, I know.
Come on.
And occasionally it does get interrupted by news. Like we've got some breaking news here, for
Right.
example. Andrew Tate has been charged with rape, human trafficking and forming organised crime groups to sexually exploit women. This is a breaking story. I'm assuming this is in Romania that he's been charged. More information coming through. Romanian prosecutors have sent the controversial influencer and his brother Tristan plus 2 other suspects to trial on these charges of human trafficking, rape and forming a criminal organisation to sexually exploit women. So they have been held for a very long time without being charged, under house arrest and under various other forms of conditions. So we'll bring you up to date with all of that as it happens. They have, of course, denied all the charges. And that's where we are. So, I mean, the one thing about Andrew Tate is that he continues to make the news. He continues to kind of be a subject of much conversation, and this will make it even more so.
Yeah, I mean, these are charges. Let's wait to see what comes out and if he's convicted. Now, there's something that I read in an investigative piece about him. I can't guarantee it's true, but this is what I read, that there's a house with women living in it who work on his webcam channel.
Yeah.
And they all had a tattoo of his name. Now, when I heard that, I thought, well, that's very interesting, because that does imply a level, if it's true, of some kind of psychological manipulation or coercion, which would go along with sort of the boyfriend, lover boy method he's been accused of for luring women into webcam work.
Yes.
So let's see.
Well, or they might just like him.
It's an odd situation, though, to have a group of women all with his tattoo
It is.
in a house working in webcam. That for me was one of the clearest signs that there was coercion of some sort going on. It's subtle, but it works, you see.
It does. Interesting times. Well, we'll come back to that, I'm sure, as and when we get some more breaking news on it. Meanwhile, there's lots of other things to talk about. We missed you last week on the COVID inquiry, which is underway currently today with George Osborne, I think, giving evidence. Yesterday was David Cameron. It doesn't seem to be getting anywhere. I know that I'm an impatient kind of individual, and it's only been going for a week. But I haven't really learned anything. Have you?
No, and you know what? I've really tried to be optimistic, or at least to withhold judgment, because we shouldn't prejudge the outcome of the inquiry. But you know, it's going to take years. One thing I thought was really disappointing is they're not going to look at the impact of school closures until 2025. Are you kidding me? I mean, the impact on children education is one of the most devastating results of the lockdown.
Yeah.
The other thing is the inquiry has a COVID policy, and this COVID policy invites regular visitors to have weekly lateral flow tests. Anyone that's coming for a day to take a lateral flow test before they go. It encourages or invites people to wear face masks, and the rooms are going to be sanitised, and they're using a disinfectant defogger. I mean, this is a really overboard COVID safety pantomime.
They love it.
And the thing is, though, I looked at some of the other inquiries that are going on. The Post Office Horizon inquiry doesn't have a COVID policy.
Yeah.
I don't think the other inquiries are asking for these things, just the COVID one, which does give you the feeling that it's all about safety pantomime. And of course it is, because there's a Cochrane review now that shows that masks don't really work very well. And also, if the people going are fully vaccinated, why are they worried still about lateral flow tests? The whole thing feels rigged.
Well, I also
to be
assume
a whitewash.
there's people walking around with COVID all the time now, right? Which doesn't appear to be a concern for anyone. So why is it a concern for them?
And the questions from Lady Harriet to Boris Johnson, those first 150 questions, weren't very encouraging. There's a question asking why the UK, did the UK compare with Taiwan, Singapore and New Zealand? Well, why isn't it asking if we compared with Sweden, that has one of the lowest rates of excess mortality in the world and didn't lock down? It feels like it's got a baked-in bias. So I have to say, although I don't want to prejudge the outcome, I think we shouldn't expect the inquiry to be any sort of white knight. I think it's likely it's going to end up, after huge cost to us, the taxpayer, and after many years, to come up with the utterly woefully incorrect conclusion that we should have locked down harder and earlier.
Yes, and everybody did what the best they could, and they were all trying their hardest, and there was absolutely no reason to criticise anyone. apart from Boris Johnson, obviously, who's the criminal element in everything now.
And Brexit and austerity and racism.
Yeah,
it's amazing how many daggers have been thrown at targets you wouldn't have expected but should have done.
Yeah. I'd like to see some of these barristers offering to work for nothing and then see how keen they are to appear at these inquiries.
Darling, do you know any barristers?
I do, actually. I do know quite a few barristers.
They don't work for nothing.
Yeah, but they could in some cases, and many of them do pro bono work. But if you're that keen on doing something which is supposedly good for the nation, why would you want to charge money for it?
Well, everybody has to earn an honest crust.
Oh, yeah. They're like these guys that are always going on strike. Don't get enough money.
But on another COVID thing, can I just segue into something else? So we've seen the videos in the latest episode of the Partygate scandal, the jingle and minglers.
Yeah.
And I feel that
Piers
people
Morgan's son put it best. He said, surely it's punishment enough to have had to have attended that. What an awful-looking gathering, because it really is. It's possibly the worst-looking party I've ever seen.
I don't know, Mike. December 2020, when socialising indoors was banned, you may well have been grateful for that little shindig. The thing is, you know, it is true that the rules were constantly shifting, so there was a little bit of confusion. But let's just rewind back to Boris Johnson's speech to the nation on the 23rd of March. He said we must go at home, and the police would have powers to enforce it. You know, nobody was under any illusion that parties were okay. You know, my son didn't have a 16th birthday party. There was just those of us in the house who were there. People's funerals were miserly and rubbish affairs. Fathers didn't attend births. Christmas was cancelled that year. I don't think there was really any confusion. They knew that they were bending the rules. The real issue is, why were they bending the rules? And they were bending the rules because they didn't feel like they were in mortal danger.
Because the rules didn't matter.
They didn't feel like their lives were at risk. In fact, you might as well say they'd done a reasonable job of assessing the risk for themselves. And I think that's one of the important points to remember. Now, so naturally people are angry because it's very hypocritical to see people partying when the rest of us had cancelled Christmases. But I don't think we should really give in, actually, to that desire for retribution. You know, we're still talking about Partygate and not lockdown. That's one thing. But the other thing is, do you know how many fines there have been? How many COVID fines for socialising and travel? 120,000.
Right.
Okay?
And they haven't been rescinded, right?
No, they have not. And do you know what I would rather see? I would rather see a pardon for every fine so far. Because people were just doing normal things. You know, most of those fines were for things like socialising, okay?
Yeah.
So people were fined for sitting on benches or
we can all remember
having a cup of tea with a neighbour. There was a homeless person who was fined for not being at home.
Do you remember the footage of the student sort of home in Newcastle with the police knocking on the door asking for everyone to come outside because they wanted to know how many people were in there? You're kind of going, well, what difference does it make? 7, 8, 9? What's the problem? You know, but they were very, very hard line on it.
2 students were fined £10,000 each for organising a snowball fight in January 2021 in Leeds. Now, if you're angry about people getting tipsy at a party, why aren't you angry that students had life-destroying fines for throwing a snowball? So actually, it's not like I don't want to see the people at the party get their just desserts, of course, but I would rather that we turn our attention to 120,000 people that suffered over rules that just weren't proportionate and they weren't humane. And you know what it shows? It shows the rules are too hard to follow because they're not humane.
Right. They're not sensible, is my problem. It's not really whether they're humane. They just don't make any sense. Does getting their just desserts include them losing their jobs, though, or them not going to get whatever it is, the honour that they... Because a couple of them are on Boris Johnson's honours list, it would seem.
Well, I mean, I'm afraid you're talking to the ultimate cynic today. I'm not really sure what the honours list means anymore. I think it's... It should be something that we're all proud of and think means something.
I don't think it means much.
But quite often it doesn't mean much anymore. I've got 3 words for you. So Jimmy Savile, you know, David Cameron's hairdresser was given an honour.
Sir Tony Blair.
Ugh. That's the worst one out of the lot. No, that's unfair.
The worst one is Lord Ross Kempsell, who used to work here. Who's about, you know, I think 27, 28, something like that. He's now against the House of Lords. In
all seriousness, no, I don't think people should lose their jobs unless that is commensurate with the position they were in at the time. I mean, I really do think that we need a pardon for everybody that had a fine. You know, there are still cases in the courts. I mean,
the reason I ask you that question is because they're all quite high up inside various bits of the Tory party, you know, campaigning for one person or another, and they're clearly sort of in with the furniture, if you could be such a thing in a political party. But
we're going down the wrong tracks. That's not the point. The point is that we need to get our heads around the fact that they knew the risk was low enough that it was okay to be at a party. Therefore, cancelling Christmas for the nation was the wrong thing to do.
While having a party.
This is what needs to come out at the inquiry and in the media. Stop banging on about punishing people. pardon the people that were given unfair fines and be honest about the risk. We knew what the risks of COVID were before we locked down. You know, there's a World Health Organization report in mid-February 2020 that acknowledged the risk was highly stratified. We should have been honest about the risks, prepared people accordingly, you know, in relation to their own demographic and clinical risk, and we should never have locked down.
No, I think that's probably something that an awful lot of people will now agree with, even though they wouldn't have agreed with you if you'd said it in February 2020. Let's talk about cats.
Meow.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was going to let you do that. I didn't want to meow at you. I mean, it's been done before.
This video that I think, well, it's an audio, isn't it? I think everybody must have listened to it by now. And if you haven't listened to it, please, please, please go on social media and listen.
It's on our TalkTV Twitter if you wish to find it.
Great, of course it is. Because what we hear is a teacher severely reprimanding 13-year-old girls for saying that if you identify as a cat, you're mentally unwell, and that there are two genders. I mean, they mean sexes, but you know what I mean. They're 13.
Yeah.
The teacher goes on to basically insult them in various ways. She says they're homophobic. Yeah. She says they're despicable. It concludes with her saying she's going to report them to Miss Willis, who I guess is the head, and that they need an
Miss
educational...
Willis being gender specific. Miss Willis, is that?
Ms. Willis. Mux Willis. No, she says Miss Willis.
Yeah.
And that they need to be referred
Ironic.
for an educational conversation, which does sound awfully like a re-education
No, it does sound a bit
101.
like Maoist, doesn't it?
But, you know, at one point she says there is 3 biological sexes, thereby making 3 terrible mistakes. 1 grammatical, there are... there are 2 biological sexes, so her second mistake is biological, and the third is pedagogical. She's basically shutting them down. She's saying that they can't question, that she's going to give them an opinion. She doesn't back it up with any rational framework or with any science. She just tells them what they have to believe, and if they don't believe it, they've either got to shut up or go for re-education. Yeah. And I think that's what's been so disturbing for people hearing it. It's a little totalitarian of a teacher, isn't it?
Very.
And
I suspect it's not that unusual either.
It's not. I think I've told you before on air, it happened to one of my son's friends. He was taken out of his class and told he couldn't question that there were more than 2 genders, or whether there'd be no place in the school for him. And I've heard other stories like this.
We had a
just
caller
on
yesterday.
The parental grapevine.
We had a caller yesterday who had exactly that explanation, or that experience rather, and his son was told he was going to be put in detention, but a week later they still haven't heard anything. Basically for saying exactly that.
I think that, you know, we have to, there's a few things we have to do in response to this. First of all, we have to question who's teaching the teachers. There have been other stories in the media about how sex ed has frankly gone a little too far. You know, I've seen some leaked materials from sex education lessons, and if I brought them in, you wouldn't be able to show them on air. You would not be able to show the graphic images and the rather graphic descriptions that primary school children are seeing in the classroom.
Which can't be right,
you wouldn't be safe to air it.
No.
So we need to know who's teaching the teachers, because if this teacher thinks it's okay to identify as any gender and okay to identify as a cat, we have to question what kind of activist groups are feeding her this sort of nonsense. The second thing is parents need to see what these materials are. You know, I think there are some schools who want to consult with parents and develop shared values, and that's great, but clearly there are schools who don't want to share these materials, which is why all these little stories are popping out now through the woodwork. And that's not right. Parents have a right to know what their children are being taught.
And of course they're hiding, these teachers, behind what I would call a mythical shield, where they say, oh, but we have to do this in case, you know, children have got abusive parents, or parents who are bigots, or parents who are just not very nice, or parents who don't
like
have
cats.
a good relationship with them, and all this kind of thing.
Yeah, maybe they're dog people, not cat people.
It's not for them. It's not for the teachers to judge the parents, is it?
Of course not. And the thing is, we're not talking about teaching... Well, goodness, I was under the old-fashioned delusion when my children went to primary school. They were learning about the 3 R's, you know, reading, writing and arithmetic. Turns out they're learning about all kinds of exotic sex practices and multiple genders, which is part of an unproven ideology. But no, you do have a right to know that, because we're not talking about science, we're not talking about maths, we're not even talking about the way religion and faiths are taught, which is
do
the
they even
beliefs that
teach
people
basic
hold.
biology anymore, or is that all up the Swanee as well?
No, they do. And in fact, you see, you can't withdraw your children from the sex education that happens in biology, because I believe that that's still science-based. But what's going on in these HSRE lessons is very ideological, and parents need to know that, because the state and the school shouldn't be putting themselves between the parent and the child. The parent knows what's best at their child's stage of development, and they know what is best in terms of their family environment, their culture and their religion. The other thing to remember about this teacher is she was absolutely adamant that there are 3 sexes, bizarre, and multiple genders.
She claimed, did she not, that intersex was one?
Intersex is not a sex.
Right.
She's woefully misinformed. But the thing is, there are religions who believe there are two sexes. It's already been proven in the courts. It's a philosophical point of view you can hold. These are protected characteristics. You are entitled to believe that there are two sexes, which is also something we've known since the dawn of time.
Right.
Now, she was a teacher at a C of E school, so she really shouldn't be getting that wrong. So parents need to know what's being taught in schools when it comes to sex ed. The other thing is, I think it's time for the adults to get back in the room.
Yeah.
Those 13-year-old girls did a really good job of defending themselves.
They actually were very logical. I was actually encouraged when I listened to it, right? I thought, I finished it and I thought, this is great. This shows that children are actually sensible and possibly more sensible than the teachers that we currently have, because the logic they were using was entirely clear. Their reasoning was brilliant, and their justification was also good. And when they were accused of being homophobic, they answered that as well and said, no, not at all. This has got nothing to do with gay people or lesbian people. We've got no problem with that. Those were their words. They had no problem with that. Perfectly tolerant, perfectly sensible, perfectly willing to learn about other things, but equally willing to say that isn't right.
You have to
and I
applaud
think that it's great news for the next generation, isn't it?
It certainly is. And I found that really encouraging, that despite the terrible misinformation, somewhat totalitarian teaching and insults that were held at them, they held their own. But it really shouldn't fall to children to have to hold the line for basic truths. It's like the story of the Emperor's new clothes. The courtiers, the townspeople all pretended the Emperor was clothed in magnificent robes, when in fact he was naked. It took the innocence of a child to say he's naked. Well, it shouldn't just fall on children to stand up for truth, which is why, here we are doing it now. You've got to stand up for the children who are just trying to defend truth. So we hear a lot about Be Kind, the Be Kind Brigade. So there's something to be said for being... Yeah,
they're always abusing me on Twitter, the Be Kind Brigade.
Well, they do that.
Funny enough.
But kindness isn't the only virtue. We're at a time where we don't talk much about inner virtues. We talk a lot about identity, how you're presenting on the outside. But those girls demonstrated honesty and courage, and that's really important. So I think the adults need to get back in the room as well. That's the other thing. And finally, it's okay to ask questions. What's happened to teaching where you were told to basically shut up or go for re-education if you challenge your teacher?
It's ridiculous. Also, we are in a world now where there are lots of different ideas, and it's a great opportunity to look at those ideas rather than to say these are the only ideas you can have. You can't have any other ideas. That would be absolutely and utterly ridiculous, wouldn't it?
Well, of course. How are you going to learn otherwise? It's the model for scientific inquiry, for philosophical inquiry. She was shutting them down because she couldn't really handle the questions.
Right.
But it's, this is so pervasive now. We've seen it with Wix recently in the news.
Yeah.
That's made me feel a bit funny about Wix, actually, because I've bought a lot in Wix over the years. And now I feel like I'm going to have to tiptoe in really, really sort of gingerly. Well, I don't believe that male rapists should be in women's prisons, and I believe that women should have their own playing field for sport.
Does that mean
Am I allowed to come in and buy a tap? I don't know.
Brass tacks, perhaps? Maybe not. But it's ludicrous.
Perhaps I have to walk over them on the way in and out.
What a stupid thing to say. Why on earth would any businessman of any hue, of any company, have a go at the people who are coming in to buy the products? Why would you?
I don't know. I mean, it's because they feel they're on such a moral high ground. It's like the teacher with the pupil. She's so sure that her position is right, that it doesn't matter what she says to other people. I think it's going to backfire really badly for Wix.
I've got a new name for Wix. It rhymes with Wix, but it doesn't start with W. Huh?
Oh, you've got me speechless for once, Mr.
There you
Graham.
are. Now, listen, I've just got to break this news again. Andrew Tate has been charged with rape, human trafficking and forming organised crime groups to sexually exploit women. This is in Romania. Romanian prosecutors have sent the controversial influencer and his brother Tristan, plus 2 other suspects, to trial on these charges. So we'll bring you more on that as we come. Let's talk about self-censoring. Because you mentioned that this week as well, didn't you? Yeah,
I wrote an article for Spite about the rise of the self-censoring liberal. So Elizabeth Gilbert, who is the author of Eat, Pray, Love, did an emotional mea culpa style video on all her social media to say that her newly announced book, The Snow Forest, was going to be withdrawn because it's set in Russia. And she says that she had an outpouring of negative emotion from Ukrainians who were expressing their hurt and their anger that she'd set a book in Russia. And so she's withdrawn it indefinitely. I mean, what actually happened was hundreds of people left negative reviews on Goodreads, and any author knows Goodreads is important. You want good reviews, not bad reviews. So while she's saying that she is trying to be sensitive to Ukrainians. I couldn't help feeling that she might instead be pandering to the sensibilities of Western liberals and her own bottom line. Because it doesn't make any sense to say, to support Ukrainians who are fighting for their freedom, I'm going to cancel my own freedom to publish a book. You know, and also if we take this all the way through to its illogical end, are we not allowed books set in Russia at all?
Yeah, why not?
What about Dostoevsky or Chekhov? Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago. Is that still allowed?
Right.
You know, it doesn't make any sense at all. And somebody who was also criticised for a book about Russia, George Orwell.
Yeah.
His book Animal Farm was roundly criticised for being critical of Stalin and Russia because they were our allies at the time. He wrote an alternative preface to that book in which he said that we really need to be aware of this renegade liberal. While totalitarian regimes will ban books, we don't need the regime to do it. We don't even need pressure groups to do it. Liberals in our countries now are banning their own books. It makes no sense if you believe in freedom, and books themselves should be the bastion of liberty. It's where ideas should live, not be killed off. He said, liberals fear liberty. Intellectuals do the dirt on the intellect. And, you know, we're at a stage now where limp-wristed authors won't write books and weak-kneed publishers won't publish them. And I think Elizabeth Gilbert needs to grow a backbone.
Yes, because the next thing will be, not only can you not write a book based in Russia, you can't write a book that mentions several things that people don't like the sound of.
Well, I mean, look at the sensitivity readers. We were talking about Roald Dahl a couple of months ago. All mentions of fat kids were removed from his books, which, you know, hasn't resulted in the reduced body mass index of a single child. There are warnings in the front of Nancy Mitford's new edition, in P.G. Wodehouse. Andrew Lloyd Webber was saying in the news this week that he wanted to set a musical in another country, and he was told he can't set a musical in another country because it's cultural appropriation.
I was amazed that he would have gone along with that, because if I'd been him, I would just gone, well, I'm doing it anyway.
Yeah, we need to reverse the trend of this long, slow march of the sensitivity readers. Because literature shouldn't be seen as something dangerous, but a place to explore ideas. Lionel Shriver warned of this a few years ago, actually. She said that if we give in to this idea of cultural appropriation and sensitivity reading, that fiction would become homogenous, timid and dreary. And I think we're there. Yeah. I think we're there. You know, people aren't even brave enough to put the book out in the first place.
That's ridiculous.
Before they get the criticism.
I know. Bonkers. Mad. Great to see you, Laura. Thank you very much indeed. Laura Dodsworth will be back next week, of course. Many matters arising from that. We shall talk about all of them as well coming up. We've got many more things to do. Coming up in the next hour, James Sunderland MP is going to be here. We're going to speak to a retired submarine captain, Ryan Ramsey, about that terrible situation in the North Atlantic. And Russell Quirk will tell us why you're going to be paying about £7 grand more for your mortgage this year, thanks to the Bank of England. This is TalkTV.